Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of The Law and You. I am your host, yours truly, attorney at law, Shellon Washington, with office located at 455 Utica Avenue in Brooklyn, New York. For those of you who've been following my show, you know the areas that I'm specialized in. And today I'm bringing you an edition based in matrimonial law. Today we're going to examine how you're going to leverage your post-nap versus your pre-nap in terms of marrying either before and having a pre, or marrying and then having a post-nuptials. So let's get into it this afternoon. We're going to discuss a particular incident with a client of mine. By the way, I do have the authorization of the client to tell the story here this afternoon. And I hope that you listening to this will be an inspiration to those of you listening to it, and you would not make any of the mistakes that we talk about on this show on a regular basis. So let's get into it. Those of you who have followed me in the past, you know that I'm always preaching about having a post-nap or having a pre-nuptials to protect your assets. In the event that, you have assets before you get married, your assets is protected. Or you acquired assets during the marriage, your assets will then be protected also. And just a quick recap, though. The prenup is the one that you execute prior to marrying the person, meaning that you would have get an agreement drafted, consulted an attorney, have the agreement prepared, discuss it with your spouse, share it with your spouse, and then your spouse would, or your potential spouse, I should say, because if it's a pre, you're not married yet, but your intentions are to marry that person. And then you would have shared that drafted prenup with your spouse and have your spouse go review it with their attorney. If your spouse refuses to review it with an attorney, that's your spouse problem, but you will give that spouse opportunity, that proposed spouse or your fiance, whatever it is, the opportunity to go and review that prenup with their attorney. And then once that is done, the parties could willingly enter into that agreement that in the event the marriage doesn't work out, this is what is going to be. All the terms therein will determine how the parties separate. However, if you're not that fortunate and you decided to get married and then enter into a post-nap, that's another clever way to protect yourself. Mostly the money spouse, the spouse that doesn't make a lot of money or not good with money, there's no need to protect that person. But the one who has the money is the one who needs protection, because oftentimes when people break up, when there's a bad breakup or there's infidelity in a relationship, somehow things got misguided, and then people have bitter fights over who gets what, over who gets the dog, who gets the cat, who gets whatever. But you can avoid all of this by making sure you have your post-nap or your prenup. And there is a situation which I would like to mention, about a client of mine. This client of mine, she was married to the spouse prior to, they had no prenup, no post-nuptials, nothing of the sort. They were married when they had virtually nothing. But then afterwards, I guess she acquired a lot of assets. But the husband, on the other hand, didn't have much. The husband was working for a lot. The husband income at some point surpasses the wife's income, but for some reason or the other, the wife was able to save her money very quickly and start acquiring assets. And during the time that she started acquiring the assets, the husband was not contributing towards the acquisition of those assets. He was using his money to, go travel, have parties, and, various things, support extramarital relationships. And eventually the parties acquired the wife acquired substantial assets. And then it came a time when they separated again. Well, the first time they separated the first time. When they separated the first time, the wife filed a divorce. She divorced the husband. But fortunately for her, when they divorced, they created an agreement which would have been effective regardless of whether or not they remarried. So that agreement that they created, and the parties both executed that agreement. That agreement went into force and effect. So when the parties get back together, they divorced and then they remarried. But the agreement that they created at the time that they divorced was so effective that it operated as a premarital agreement on the second marriage. So on the first marriage, no protection. On the second marriage, the agreement that they entered into at the time they divorced the first time operated as a premarital agreement on the second marriage. So when they got married, the parties the second time, I'm not sure if they were both aware or not, but this agreement operated as a prenuptial on the second marriage. So they got married again. She continued to acquire assets, and then this time, though, when they decided that they were going to finally divorce, and the husband wanted to take that woman to the cleaners, even though his income was substantially higher than hers. It's just that she had the assets. He did not. She used whatever she had to acquire assets, and he, with his substantial income close to $200,000 a year, he was squandering that money, going to parties, spending it on frivolous purchases, brand name stuff. And this happens very often, guys. A lot of times money is always an issue in relationships. So you have to make sure that whoever you're taking is going to be your equal. So he was squandering and she was saving and purchasing assets. So when the parties decided, okay, we're going to go our separate ways this time around, guess what? The agreement that they had executed at the first time they divorced operated as a prenuptial agreement. And it stopped the husband from trying to dig his claws into her property. So when I reviewed the agreement with the client and I recognized what was happening, I advised the client, listen, this man is not entitled to nothing that you used your money to acquire unless he can establish that he is the one who made any type of contributions towards your assets. And there was no evidence that he made any significant contribution, because like I said, what he was doing, he was squandering, partying. And a lot of times this happens in a relationship. You'll have one spouse will be the one that is prudent when it comes to finances and would like to ensure that the parties live a certain type of lifestyle. And there'll be one that doesn't care. There will be the spender. There's the saver and there's always the spender. And that's what happened here. And I've seen so many situations where with the saver and the spender. Right now, I have a situation with a saver and another situation with a saver and a spender. And that case was actually closed out on my client. I took the spender. He was my client in that case. But the problem was, what the judge did to my client was egregious. So I had to appeal. I wasn't involved in his case the whole time. I took that case over after he was really, really screwed over by the court. And by the time I took it, the judge had already granted a judgment, and I had to find clever ways to get back him before the court and have that entire thing redone, get something a little bit more fair, a little bit more equitable. Because guys, just remember, no court is concerned about doing equity for you. You have got to be the one to be concerned about your own equity. You've got to be the one to consult with an attorney before you do anything. The court is just there to determine what they think is best. And a lot of times, if a judge is upset with one party, that judge will mess you over if that judge is upset with you. So it's something you got to think about. And you want to be the own captain of your ship. You want to pilot your ship yourself. And in order to do that, is a postnup or a prenup. People will say, oh, the prenup is expensive, or the postnup is too expensive. But think about this. If you spend $10,000 to get a prenuptial agreement versus spending $30,000 or $40,000 or $50,000 in legal fees to get a messy divorce if you have assets. Think about that. So if you know to yourself that you're the kind of person that you are going to acquire a lot of assets, right? Even if at the time you're marrying, you don't have as much, there is a likelihood, depending on how qualified you are, what type of business you're doing, what type of transactions you're engaged in, that there might be a possibility that you might become a money spouse at some point, or you might have a high net worth in your marriage, not necessarily the highest earner, but your net worth might be high. As with that client that I was telling you about earlier, she was not the money spouse, but she was clever when it comes to money. And that's what she used her money and leverage it in terms of building assets. You can invest in stocks, bonds, you can take your money and you can grow it. And if you're that type of person, you could do a 9-to-5 job, take your income, part of it, invest it, and then use it to purchase other assets. Then you need to protect yourself, because I'm going to tell you what, there's a study. I recently saw a study where a psychiatrist was saying that we're not really meant to be monogamous people. People are by nature polygamous, or polyandry. So if you believe that, I mean, I don't technically believe it. I believe men are, but I don't believe women so much. But there are some women, who are that way. So if you believe that study to be true, and you think people are by nature, they're not meant to be monogamous, right? You're going to know that at some point when the person you're with might be looking at somewhere else, or something might go wrong. And this doesn't happen to everyone, by the way. All those studies that they tell you, it's not necessarily applicable to everyone. There are major exceptions in certain situations, right? So I personally believe there's a lot of people outside of that scope of that finding or that research that they did, but you never know. So in order to be protective of yourself, because you don't want to be 65, 70 years old or more above that and going to a divorce court because your spouse decide that at that big age that they would like to move on to with some, younger person or whatever the situation is. So you want to be in the category where even if that happens, you'd be like, okay, just go. But know that you're not touching anything that I have. You can go. But my assets, everything that I've purchased, everything that I've acquired during this relationship is protected. So you won't be able to touch it. And, it's unfortunate that this type of situation, we have a lot of protection. If you live in the United States, the laws in a lot of states offer some degree of protection to people in terms of postnup, prenuptials. But it's not so liberal as you get to Guyana, for instance, right? Guyana, the issue is going to be whether or not your contract is enforceable, because they have the Married Person Property Act, right? So you have to consider the parameters of enforcing a prenuptial around or based on the scope of the laws in the country you're in. We know that it's easy to enforce it here in in New York, for instance, in New Jersey. You can enforce a prenuptial or postnuptial easily, right? Because there's scope for that. And there's something we have called summary judgment. You can make a summary judgment based on an agreement you had with somebody. So you go to divorce a person and they say, no, I want to have child support, I want alimony or spousal support, and I want half of everything you have. And it's no, because there's a prenuptial or a postnuptial in place that will stop you from being able to do any of that type of stuff. So no, it doesn't operate like that, but a lot of times people take the chances and they get into it, and then they realize like, okay, this is what it is. You have to split everything down if you don't protect yourself early up front, because people do not care. When people are going through really bad breakups and they're fighting with each other and it's messy, they do not care about the other person. That's how it works. In very limited circumstances, which I've seen a lot. I've gotten mostly my older clients. I see this happens where the parties they're like, we're done, we're divorcing. But mostly the man will say, you know what, let her keep the house, let her keep this, let her keep that. All I want to be able to do is keep my pension. I don't care. And he walks. And rightfully so. A lot of times, if it's people with children, I personally believe that that is what should happen. If the man wants to walk with another woman, he should leave the spouse with the children and walk, because he can go and rebuild if he want to. But to rob his children from that type of stability, it's just not worth it. It's not worthy. It's not right. And, you know, a lot of times the court could stop that from happening, especially if there's young children involved. You can't just decide that you're going to run off into the sunshine and disrupt your household. And in order to prevent that, guys, like I said, the best thing to do is to make sure you protect those assets with a prenuptials. Guys, I know I have been a little bit busy lately, and what I've been doing, we've been having some reruns on the show. So but today I'm available, and I decided I would like to run the show, but I am going to be running the show for just 15 minutes now. If people have questions and you need questions answered, you can always, you know, put it in the chat while I'm on the show live, or you can always call the office. Okay, the phone number to call the office is 718-877-3100. Again, guys, just remember the office is located at 455 Utica Avenue, Brooklyn, New York, Suite 2R. We're on the second floor. So you can walk in, get an appointment, or you can call us at any time. Consultation is free. There's a free 15 minutes consultation. So you can give us a call at 718-877-3100. Okay, guys. Thank you again for joining this week's edition of The Law and You. And I just would like you to know that I'll be removing the 30 minutes and reducing the show to 15 minutes on Saturdays. So if you would like me to speak on any particular topic, you can always send me a text message, or you can call the office, or you can just send a DM me at any time on my Facebook account. I'll get your message, I'll respond, or whatever the situation is. But if you're seeking consultation on a legal issue on any of the areas we practice, which includes matrimonial law, tort, medical malpractice, and to some degree landlord and tenant, give us a call. 718-877-3100. Guys, thank you so much for joining me today. And I do hope I see you next week, because next week I'll be here live. And just note, guys, that this is the summer, so I get a little bit busier in the summer, but I'll be here for my weekly show. You can reach me at any time, again, like I said, on the office number at 718-877-3100. Thank you again for joining me on today's edition of The Law and You. And I hope I'll see you again next Saturday at 4 to 4:15 for The Law and You. Thank you so much, guys. I do hope you enjoy the rest of this busy 4th of July weekend.